The house smelled of pine and roasted turkey. Cinnamon and nutmeg clung to the air, mingling with the faint scent of freshly baked pies cooling on the counter. It was Christmas morning, and for years the protagonist had cherished these moments. The laughter of family, the warmth of the hearth, the sparkling lights that reflected on the ornaments hanging delicately from the tree. This year they had gone further than ever before, decorating every corner, laying out the best china, and preparing every dish with meticulous care. Yet, as they stepped into the dining room, their heart began to sink. Their son, a man they had nurtured from infancy, sat at the head of the table, a smug smile plastered on his face. His wife stood beside him, her eyes cold and calculating. The atmosphere, so carefully crafted, suddenly felt heavy, almost hostile. "You're not invited, Freeloader." The son spat, the words sharp as a whip. The protagonist froze. For a brief second, they wondered if they had misheard. The laughter of a neighbor, the faint tinkle of the Christmas bell on the door, even the soft hum of the refrigerator. All these background sounds seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of those words. His wife, silent but unwavering, nodded in agreement. That single gesture confirmed it. This was no joke, no fleeting temper. They were united in disdain, openly and deliberately humiliating the person who had sacrificed everything for them. And the most staggering part, they were living in the very house the protagonist had built, room by room, with love and toil. The room seemed to tilt, the lights shimmered as if mocking them. The table, laden with carefully prepared dishes, felt like a stage set for betrayal. Every ornament seemed to glint in judgment. For a moment, a dizzying mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief crashed over the protagonist. But instead of reacting with shouting, pleading, or tears, they did something unexpected. They smiled, not a warm, inviting smile, but a calm, controlled one. It was the kind of smile that carried the weight of storms held in check, the kind that warned of consequences yet to come. "You have until morning to leave," they said softly, each word deliberate, resonating with authority and quiet fury. The son blinked, taken aback by the serenity, the almost unnatural composure of the person he had tried to humiliate. He opened his mouth, likely to retort, but no words came. His wife shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the battle they thought they had won was not theirs to claim. The protagonist walked out of the dining room, each step measured, each heartbeat steady despite the storm raging inside. That night, the house was silent, but it was no longer warm. The oppressive weight of betrayal hung in the air, suffocating, yet strangely electrifying. As they lay in bed, the protagonist thought back over the years. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every gesture of care now contrasted sharply with the venomous ingratitude staring back at them from the dining room. And yet, amidst the hurt, there was clarity. This was not a moment for rash revenge. It was a moment to prepare, to plan, and to reclaim the dignity that had been so carelessly trampled. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, the protagonist's resolve solidified. They were calm, they were collected, and they were unstoppable. The morning would bring consequences, but not in the way anyone expected. The seed of justice had been planted that night, watered with years of patience and tempered by betrayal. Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled mockingly, but inside a plan began to form. A plan that would ensure that come morning, the scales of their family's morality would finally tip in the right direction. That Christmas night was the end of innocence and the beginning of reckoning. The night stretched long and silent after the confrontation. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the house in an almost serene hush, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions inside. The festive lights cast gentle shadows on the walls, but their glow could not warm the emptiness that now settled in the protagonist's chest. They sat alone in the living room, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, staring at the tree. The ornaments reflected a distorted image, tiny mirrors of the life they had built, the family they had nurtured, and the bitter realization that it had all been taken for granted. Their son had not just insulted them. He had trampled on years of care, disrespecting both their love and their home. The protagonist allowed themselves a deep, quiet sigh, but beneath the sorrow, a spark glimmered. It was a spark of clarity, a chilling recognition that anger without direction was wasted energy. They did not want a heated fight, nor an emotional outburst. No, they wanted something far more effective: justice, precision, and control. As the night deepened, the protagonist began to plan, not recklessly, not out of immediate impulse, but strategically. First, the logistics. The couple lived in their house, in their space, and they had no legal claim to remain. The protagonist knew the laws, the loopholes, the formalities. Quietly, they began preparing documents, drafting letters, and making phone calls, all in subtle secrecy so that neither the son nor his wife could suspect. But planning was not enough. The protagonist also cultivated patience, letting the couple's arrogance and entitlement work against them. They could sense it already. The son believed the household was his playground, his dominion. The wife moved through the rooms with a smug satisfaction, unaware that every careless word and every lazy assumption was being noted, recorded in the protagonist's mind. Later that night, the protagonist walked through the house, room by room, assessing the terrain. Every detail mattered: the placement of furniture, the security systems, even the mail slot by the door. Every weakness could be turned to advantage, and for the first time since the insult, the protagonist smiled genuinely, imagining the scales finally tipping. Meanwhile, the son and his wife retreated to their bedroom, their voices whispering spiteful words, confident that the confrontation had passed. They laughed at the old parent's stern warning, mocking the calmness that had frightened them earlier. But the protagonist's mind was not elsewhere. It was right there, listening through the thin walls, cataloging every flaw, every hint of overconfidence. Sleep eventually came, fitful and shallow, but it brought clarity rather than exhaustion. The protagonist dreamed not of rage or chaos, but of order, a sequence of events meticulously aligned to reclaim what was theirs. In the dream, the couple packed in a frantic hurry, and the protagonist stood quietly in the doorway, calm, composed, victorious. When morning finally arrived, it would not be a day for shouting, pleading, or humiliation. It would be a day for consequences, precise and unavoidable. The calm before the storm was the most dangerous time of all because in calmness, the protagonist's mind was sharper than ever, their patience endless, and their resolve unbreakable. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softening the world in white silence. Inside, a storm brewed, silent, hidden, but inevitable. By the time the police arrived, the son and his wife would realize that this was not a simple eviction, not a momentary disagreement. This was the end of their impunity, the reckoning for every insult, every selfish act, every moment they had treated their home and family as disposable. And through it all, the protagonist remained calm, a quiet eye in the approaching hurricane, knowing that when the storm broke, it would break *** on their terms ***. The morning light spilled into the house, but it brought no warmth. The festive decorations now seemed almost mocking, their colors garish in the harsh clarity of daylight. The son and his wife moved about with feigned nonchalance, still believing themselves untouchable, still imagining that the protagonist's calm had been nothing more than a momentary lapse in frustration, but the protagonist had already set their plan in motion. Their movements were quiet, deliberate, each step measured with precision. There would be no shouting, no public humiliation, only the slow, inescapable tightening of consequences. First came the legal groundwork. While the couple had flaunted their presence in the house as if it were their right, the protagonist had long ensured that the property papers, rental agreements, and utility accounts were all in their name. One quick phone call to the authorities would suffice, but the real power lay in subtlety. The protagonist began by quietly contacting the utility companies, alerting them to discrepancies in the accounts, enough to sow minor frustration, but not enough to alert the couple to immediate danger. Then came the small, almost imperceptible acts that would set the stage for poetic justice. The locks were quietly rekeyed so that only the protagonist held control. Doors that had always opened easily now required a careful turn. Windows that had been left ajar in arrogance now resisted attempts to open them. Electrical outlets were subtly tested, ensuring that minor inconveniences would arise at the right moments. Each one a reminder that control had shifted. As the morning wore on, the couple grew restless. The son's attempts to assert authority over the household were met with inexplicable resistance. Appliances refused to cooperate. Minor mishaps slowed them down, and messages from utility companies appeared, questioning overdue payments and account irregularities. Each annoyance was small, almost laughable, yet cumulative, a growing testament to their loss of power. Through it all, the protagonist maintained an almost supernatural calm. They moved about the house, brewing tea, adjusting ornaments, and maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Every glance, every word was measured, designed to unsettle the couple without revealing the larger plan. Their silence spoke volumes, their eyes conveyed quiet authority, and every minor inconvenience was another stitch in the tapestry of reckoning. By mid-morning, the tension in the house was palpable. The son snapped at trivial matters, the wife's irritation grew visible, and their shared arrogance began to crack under the weight of confusion and frustration. They exchanged furtive glances, whispering accusations, unaware that every moment of resentment played into the protagonist's hands. Outside, the world remained calm, the snow continuing its quiet descent, as if nature itself conspired to conceal the storm brewing inside. And then, almost imperceptibly, the protagonist made the final preparations. A phone call, brief and unremarkable, setting the stage for the inevitable arrival of authority. The words were simple, clinical, but they carried the weight of years of betrayal and heartbreak. The couple, still wrapped in their illusion of control, remained oblivious to what was coming. They had underestimated the quiet strength of the person they had insulted, the patience forged by decades of care and sacrifice. They did not see the storm because it was invisible, silent, and unstoppable, moving precisely as its architect intended. As the afternoon approached, the tension reached its peak. The protagonist stood by the window, hands folded calmly, watching the snow fall and reflecting on the strange satisfaction that came from planning rather than reacting. Revenge, they realized, was not in anger. It was in mastery, in turning betrayal into a carefully orchestrated lesson. And somewhere in the quiet of the house, the first hints of fear began to flicker in the son's eyes, a recognition, faint but undeniable, that the game had changed, and the rules were no longer his to write. By evening, the stage was set. The house hummed with the uneasy tension of anticipation. The protagonist's heart, though steady, carried the thrill of imminent justice. Tomorrow the reckoning would come. The calm before the storm had ended. The unseen counterattack was complete. And when the storm broke, it would break *** perfectly and without mercy ***. The morning arrived like a quiet predator, soft light spilling across the snow-covered yard. Inside, the house was deceptively calm, every ornament in place, every dish waiting, as if nothing had changed. But the atmosphere was charged, an invisible tension crackling in the air. The son and his wife moved about with their usual arrogance, oblivious to the fact that the invisible threads of control had already been pulled tight. The protagonist waited in the living room, calm, composed, sipping tea as if this were an ordinary morning. Their heart beat steadily, a quiet rhythm beneath the tension. They did not need to shout. They did not need to plead. Everything had been arranged. The storm they had carefully orchestrated was about to strike. Then came the sound that shattered their illusion of control. The first knock at the door. It was firm, authoritative, and unmistakable. The couple froze, their eyes met, and for the first time in years, fear flickered across their faces. "Police," came the measured voice from outside. The son's arrogance faltered, replaced by confusion, then desperation. "This is my house," he protested, though the words were hollow, weak against the undeniable truth. They were trespassing in a home that was never theirs to claim. The protagonist rose slowly, each step deliberate, each motion calm, almost ceremonial. There was no gloating in their demeanor, only quiet authority, a presence that seemed to command the very air around them. "By law, you have no right to remain," they said, their voice steady, unwavering. "Everything you see here belongs to me. You were given notice, you have ignored it. The rest is out of my hands." The police officers stepped inside, professional and neutral, but their presence alone carried weight. They had been called not in haste, but in careful, deliberate preparation, proof of residence, documentation of ownership, and clear, undeniable evidence of trespassing. The couple's protests became frantic, shrill, filled with the kind of arrogance that only comes from ignorance of consequences. The wife clutched at the son's arm, whispering excuses, arguments, even threats. But the protagonist remained calm. Their quiet presence was a shield, a silent assertion that justice was finally here. As the officers explained the legalities, showing them the paperwork, the son's voice faltered. Each sentence, each legal term, each fact presented was a hammer striking the foundations of their false confidence. He tried to assert control, to negotiate, to appeal to the parent's heart, but the protagonist had none to spare for lies and betrayal. By mid-morning it was over. The couple packed their belongings in stunned silence, their previous arrogance replaced by a simmering, impotent fury. They left the house that had been their playground, removed from the life they had treated with disdain, and the protagonist watched it all with an almost serene satisfaction. There was no joy in cruelty, no gloating in punishment, only the deep, resonant triumph of reclaimed dignity. The house was silent once more, but this silence was different. It was not oppressive, nor filled with tension. It was the calm of order restored. The protagonist walked through each room, touching the surfaces, adjusting the ornaments, taking in the air that now felt right, whole, and theirs. For a long while they sat at the head of the festive table, the same one where betrayal had occurred, looking at the empty chairs. And for the first time in years they felt the true warmth of the home, untainted by arrogance or disrespect. They had not only defended their property, but had reclaimed their self-respect, their authority, and their peace. And though the snow continued to fall outside, and though the world remained unchanged in its indifferent rhythm, the protagonist knew that within these walls justice had been done. Revenge, they realized, was not about anger. It was about balance. It was about ensuring that betrayal met consequence, and that patience and clarity triumphed over rashness and entitlement. In the quiet aftermath, the protagonist smiled softly, not with malice, but with a profound sense of victory. The storm had passed. The house, once a stage for humiliation, was now a sanctuary again. And as the protagonist looked out the window at the falling snow, they felt a peace deeper than any they had known before, a peace born not of revenge alone, but of justice finally served quietly. Completely and inevitably,